Our tale today is set in the distant, prehistoric past, somewhere on the border between modern-day Austria and Italy. We can place the story somewhere in the ballpark of 5,300 years ago. Our protagonist, a man of about 45 years of age, dark-eyed, decked out in goatskin clothing topped off with a bearskin hat. Though slight, weighing somewhere around 110 pounds, and standing 5'2" to 5'3" tall, he was clearly engaged in physical labor his entire life, and was all muscle. The high levels of arsenic found in his system suggest he may have been involved in metallurgy. Now, more advanced civilizations were already just into the Bronze Age at this time. Arsenic could poison metallurgists when making arsenical bronze, where tin, then super rare, would be substituted for the toxin. Copper itself has some level of arsenic in it if taken from a less than pure source. While Central Europe was still at the end of the Stone Age, our man was found with a copper axe. We presume it is super rare. He may have suffered terribly from his heavily worn down teeth. He certainly had aches and pains, suffering from arthritis in his neck and hip. Furthermore, the mystery man lived with tapeworm in his belly. The condition of his hair and nails show extreme stress in the last 4 months of his life. One may ask, was this stress related to his eventual death? We can say his stress levels were enough to have made him very unwell in the months leading up to his murder. He was also nursing broken ribs at the time of his death, suggesting sometime in the last few weeks of his life he'd come off second best in a fight and had been given one hell of a beating. There are several other things we should mention, and will do so as we go on. Now, a little on the setting before we go to the main tale, and just an FYI, we're going to run a couple of scenarios today. Parts of Europe had become habitable to Homo sapiens as the ice sheets melted, between 26,500 and 19,000 years ago. A handful of humans had hung around the edges of the Mediterranean from about 45,000 years ago. Our Neanderthal cousins, clearly much tougher than us, were living on the continent itself 300,000 to maybe 600,000 years ago, and would either integrate with Homo sapien invaders, or be killed off by them when we arrived en masse. DNA records suggest a little bit of both. Around 8,000 years ago, things looking similar to cities started to spring up in Europe. Lepenski Vir in Serbia is one early example. As people put down roots, these societies diversified, some people taking on specialized roles. These roles, of course, included people of violence, people who protected the towns and people who attacked other towns. The area in question was headed in that direction, people congregating in small villages close to the water, and increasingly turning to farming wheat and barley for a living. Now, we believe, based on DNA tests, our mystery man may have lived around modern-day Piedmont, near the Alps. And at least a few articles out there claim some Piedmontese people alive today still have DNA matching his. Isotope testing of his teeth suggests he lived just south of the Alps in Italy. The Romans, millennia later, called the people living in this region Ligurians, stating they were culturally Celtic. But we know the area was overrun by Celts 2.5 millennia after our man's time. It does not automatically stand that he was Celtic. Now, to run a few scenarios. All take place somewhere around 5,300 years ago. Based on berries found in his stomach, found halfway up the mountain, at a certain time of year. The earliest this could be is June, the latest August. Our man, Otzi is the name we give him, had been under great stress over the last 4 months. We don't know exactly what happened, whether it's down to theft, love interests, village politics, or any other number of reasons. Scenario 1 has it he's come into conflict with somebody else in the tribe, and a blood feud developed. Probably living hand to mouth, he's unlikely to have been able to take to the mattresses till the situation calmed down. Sooner or later, he has to return to his work, variously guessed at as a specialist hunter, a shepherd, or even a metal prospector. One day, Otzi heads off to work and he never comes back. Pollen in his digestive tract, probably floating atop the water, suggests he was in the foothills before the attack happened. He had a bag and a fanny pack full of tools, his copper axe, a net to trap birds with, and a box containing firelighting material. He also carried a short knife and a half-finished bow with him. We'll come back to that bow and his half-finished quiver of arrows in a second. Either in the valley or perhaps even in the village, we know he was set upon by a gang. The blood of 4 other men would be found on his knife, arrows, and clothes. Their first clash, it appears, is up close and personal. An attacker went in for Otzi with a knife, leaving a nasty defensive wound across his right palm. Clotting around the wound suggests his death was as much as 3 days after the initial attack. The knife-wielding attacker also managed to leave Otzi with several shallow cuts to the chest. Being met by a thug with a knife, Otzi fought like hell and got himself away from that situation. He may have drawn the blood of his attackers now, or possibly later on, and he ran up into the hills. Scientists believed over the following 3 days, in a deadly game of cat and mouse, Otzi ascended to around 8,000 feet, where the yew trees were found, and then descended back into the valley, then back up into the mountain again, where he died. One possible reason for heading up could have been to grab a spar off a yew tree, to make a bow and some arrows. Yew makes for excellent bows, and Otzi's half-finished bow would have been a deadly weapon. Taller than him, it would have had a pull weight of around 90 pounds, more than enough to take down an attacker from a distance. Sometime in his final hours, Otzi had a large meal of ibex meat. An hour later, his attackers caught up with him. Clutching his knife, he turned away and scrambled for the summit, only to be struck in the upper back with an arrow. This shot would have killed him, striking an artery. An attacker approached, dealing a killing blow to the Iceman, crushing his skull with a blunt object. While it's tempting to paint a picture of Otzi coming down from the mountains to find a band of marauders attacking his village, 2 interrelated points suggest to me that perhaps he was killed by someone from inside the fold. The first, his killer took back the shaft of the arrow, and secondly, he didn't pillage what must have been an extremely rare copper axe. If the posse had come from another village, who would be any the wiser as to where this axe had come from? But if they were found with a murdered man's axe on them in the same village, is this not strong evidence of their guilt? Similarly, if the body was found with a familiar-looking arrow in him, is that itself not a smoking gun, so to speak? Now another scenario suggests Otzi did not die alone, but had been involved in a war with a neighbouring tribe, possibly over disputed land. From the moment groups of people left hunting and gathering to domesticate animals, a problem arose over the question of who owned that land. Now we were a long way from war as we know it. The Battle of Megiddo in 1479 BC is generally the first accepted war with 2 armies, the 2 sides being Egypt and the Kingdom of Kadesh. But archaeologists have found battle scenes, with a couple of dozen dead on either side, as early as 13,400 years ago in Jebel Sahara. Some scientists base this claim on the blood on Otzi's cape. They suggest he was carrying a wounded comrade shortly before his death. Perhaps the winners didn't pillage because the situation didn't allow for it. Where were the other bodies? Well, one possibility is they were there, but as Otzi had fallen in a sheltered location, He was never taken along by a glacier, never picked apart by wolves or other predators. A third possibility suggested is that he was a human sacrifice. Some experts claim Otzi himself was a Celt, and that he was taken up into the mountains by other villagers as a blood sacrifice to the gods. The reason his expensive axe was left behind, well, it was a gift left for the gods. Though the ancient Celts themselves left no written records, Roman writers such as Pliny the Elder claim they committed large-scale blood sacrifices and even cannibalized the bodies of their enemies in war. If this is the case, one presumes Otzi did not go willingly to his death. His tale, as patchy as it is, may have been completely forgotten were it not for two mountaineers coming across his body high up in the Otzi Alps in September 1991. A confluence of increasingly hot summers and a particularly wild Saharan windstorm, which carried across the Mediterranean well up into the Alps, had freed him from his suspended animation. As fascinating as Otzi is, tantalizingly so, seeing we know so much about him, yet so little, I also find his discovery more than a little disturbing. As anthropogenic climate change kicks in, only more Otzis will appear, such as Kwade Dan Sinchi, the long-ago person found, as named by the Inuit, when a body emerged from the mountains of British Columbia in 1999, and unearthed tombs of steppe people from the Altai Mountains, Scythians, Sarmatians, and many others besides. As our world teeters closer to ecological tipping points, the discoveries of these ice mummies may be a window into a past world, but their appearance also portends nothing but ill for the human race, to put it mildly.